But I noticed I did have a lot of anxiety, growing up. I had a lot of sexual trauma that I kept inside that I didn't share until like later on in my 20s. And even then, I still was drinking it all the way up until like in my 30s. I would love for you to actually go ahead and share the actual deep impact of alcohol on the brain. And I know
Yeah.
we know some of the obvious ones, but maybe you can go ahead and explain some of the less obvious ways that alcohol can go ahead and affect our mental processes and overall brain health.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. So I always like to preface this with, so I have 4 degrees in mental health, right? So I have a lot of education on mental health and psychology, and I actually did not know this, right? So no one in any one of my programs ever taught it to me. And it was really when I was doing my own sober, curious journey that I really learned about brain health. So, and now I'm a brain health nerd. So one of the things that has helped me think about alcohol is, so alcohol, whether we like it or not, is an actual literal poison, right? So it's ethanol. And so which is the same component of gasoline. So when we drink alcohol, our body sees it as a poison because that's exactly what it is. And so, kind of the obvious ways that we understand that is like, people get sick after drinking because just like getting food poisoning, we're trying to expend, something that's toxic to our body. But what I did not know is the way that your brain starts to process alcohol when you're drinking is it wants to preserve your organs, right? It's like, what is happening? This terrible thing is inside of my body. I need to start to shut down things that are not critical in this moment. So the first thing that starts to go is your motor skills, right? Which is why we slur, it's why we trip. And then the second thing that starts to go is our emotional regulation, right? It's why people become angry drunks. It's why people cry, right? Like we all had that friends, maybe it's even yourself, of like, we just don't process feelings well when we're drinking. And then lastly, it starts to shut down your short-term memory, right? So there are literal spaces in your brain that I now envision like going dark, right? Like they go offline to preserve your body. And, when I say this to people, some people are just like, yeah, that's what it is. For me, that was actually a really terrifying thing. And I think now back to, when I was bartending, and my husband still owns the bars, right? He's a New York City bar owner. So they still exist. We have a wonderful mocktail and non-alcoholic cocktail list. If you would like mocktail list, if you'd like to come in and enjoy music and not drink, but it's open till 5 o'clock in the morning. Right. And I think back to what, like, what did it look like at 3:30 a.m.? And when I became sober, there was about maybe 9 months that I bartended completely sober with all of this kind of information in my brain and just looking around at the people, right? And no judgment because I know I was there myself, but it's like these people actually aren't living their best lives, right? And I can reflect back to my own drinking and thinking like, okay, I'm sitting with my drinking friends and I'm thinking we're having this like deep, meaningful conversation. These are my besties. And if I really, really am honest with myself, it's like we were repeating ourselves. No one's really listening, right? Like, how deep is a drunken conversation? You might not even remember the details. So that's something that I always like to share as like a big, I don't know, it was a big revelation to me. Just, like you're poisoning your literal brain. That's a big deal. And then the second thing that I think is really important that I didn't understand is just how your hormones fluctuate. So, what happens when we start to drink? We get a huge surge of what's called dopamine. And dopamine is typically seen as like our reward chemical in our brain, right? So it's almost like you're anticipating a treat. So you can get this if you're seeing your partner for the first time in a while, you're petting a dog, right? It's like anything that's really rewarding, we get this like flood of yay, feel good emotion. And because our culture is so conditioned to looking at alcohol as like the things we cheers for, the way we unwind, it's the way we socialize. We have a lot of programming that the moment that we're sitting down and ordering our first drink, pouring that first glass of wine, we get this flood of like, hooray. But what happens is we get so much dopamine, our body actually gets confused. It's like, doesn't make any sense. So it starts to flood in what we call cortisol, right? And that's our stress hormone. So I don't know if this happens to you. It absolutely used to happen to me. But the cortisol rushes in about 5 hours after your last drink, which is why it's so common for people to wake up in a shame spiral, right? So they go to sleep, they put in a few hours, but they're waking up and they're like, their heart's racing, they're feeling anxious. And that cortisol can continue to raise for up to 72 hours, right? And so, again, once I sort of learned that, it made me aware that it wasn't that I was just having a difficult time being a drinker, because I really thought that for a long time. Like, why does everybody else figure this out? And I'm the one who's always stressed out. I'm always one who feels so shameful. It's really just like, I can't, there's no mind over matter that. That's just what's going to happen when I drink, because that's just what my body is doing to sort of get back to homeostasis.